Every once in a while something happens in the world that makes everyone stop and pay attention. Not just the folks who read tabloids or follow entertainment news, but everyone. And for the past couple of weeks, that something has been the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Now, I remember when it first started making headlines. At first, people thought it would just be another celebrity legal mess that would come and go. Some flashy lawyers, a few dramatic statements, and then swept under the rug. But no, this was different. The charges were serious, the stakes were high, and the deeper things went, the darker the story seemed to get. Each day of the trial brought something new: damning evidence, surprise witnesses, whispered rumors about people in high places. Folks who usually didn't care about this sort of thing suddenly found themselves glued to the news. The courtroom was packed every day. Reporters stood elbow to elbow outside, waiting for scraps of information. Cameras couldn't go inside, of course, but you'd see courtroom sketches on the evening news like it was the O.J. Simpson trial all over again. But then came day 15. That's when the story took a turn no one saw coming. It started like any other day. The weather was nothing special. People lined up early outside the courthouse, hoping to snag one of the public seats. Some had even camped out overnight. Journalists were already circling, jotting notes, whispering into phones. Rumors were flying. Again, big names were supposedly going to be involved in today's testimony, but no one could confirm who. And then the whispers turned into gasps. Because just after 9 a.m., flanked by security and walking with that calm, determined stride you'd recognize anywhere, Tom Cruise walked into the building. Now imagine that for a second. Of all people, Tom Cruise, movie star, action hero, golden boy of Hollywood, showing up in connection to this trial. I mean, you could almost hear the entire sidewalk suck in a breath at the same time. Reporters practically fell over themselves trying to get a shot or shout a question. But Cruise didn't say a word, just kept walking, eyes ahead, face unreadable. Everyone was thinking the same thing. What in the world is he doing here? Nobody had any answers, and the court clerk didn't say a word about it, just called the session to order like it was any other day. But it wasn't, not by a long shot. Something big was about to happen. You could feel it in your chest. Now, I've seen my fair share of courtroom dramas, both real and on TV, but I don't think anything could have prepared anyone for the sight of Tom Cruise walking into that courtroom, not as a spectator, not shaking hands or giving a statement. No, he was being led to the witness stand. For a moment, the entire room was frozen. You could hear the scratch of a pen or the click of someone's jaw dropping. Even the judge, who'd kept a tight grip on the courtroom's mood for 2 weeks straight, seemed momentarily caught off guard. He didn't swagger or put on any of that movie star charm. No big entrance. He just walked in with quiet purpose, dressed in a dark suit that was sharp but simple. No flashy accessories, no Hollywood glitz. He looked like a man with something serious on his mind. His expression? Calm, unreadable, the kind of face that says, "I know why I'm here. Let's get to it." People were whispering, more like hissing really, in the gallery. Is that really him? What does he have to do with Diddy? Is this some kind of stunt? One older woman sitting a few rows behind me clasped her hand over her mouth. She didn't even blink for a full minute. And to be honest, I was thinking the same thing everyone else was. Why is one of the most famous actors in the world testifying in a criminal case against one of the most powerful names in music? The tension was thick. So thick it felt like breathing through cotton. The defense lawyers leaned into each other, whispering fast. The prosecution sat still, calm, like they knew this was coming. When Cruise reached the witness box, he paused for just a second. Not for effect, but like he was grounding himself. Then he raised his right hand, took the oath, and sat down. The courtroom doors shut behind him with a soft click, and the world outside seemed to disappear. The judge gave a nod, and then the questioning began. And let me tell you, there was no celebrity attitude, no rehearsed charm. Tom Cruise wasn't there to be a star that day. He was there to say something important. And judging by the look in his eyes, it wasn't going to be light. People leaned forward in their seats. Phones buzzed in journalists' pockets, news desks waiting on live updates. Everyone could sense it. Even the walls seemed to lean in. Tom Cruise was about to speak, And whatever he said next was going to change the entire tone of that trial. When Tom Cruise finally spoke, his voice was steady, clear, calm, and deliberate. No dramatic pauses, no raised eyebrows. Just a man answering questions. But you could feel the weight behind his words, like every syllable had been carefully considered before it ever left his lips. The prosecutor started gently, almost respectfully, like they knew the room was still reeling. "Mr. Cruise, can you describe the nature of your relationship with Mr. Combs?" Tom gave a small nod. "We've known each other through mutual circles. Hollywood, private industry events, a few charity galas. Our paths have crossed over. The years." Now that alone wasn't shocking. Big names know other big names. But there was a subtle shift in his tone that hinted he wasn't just there to talk about shared red carpet appearances. Then came the next question. "Did you ever spend time with Mr. Combs outside of public events?" Another pause, just long enough to make people lean in. "Yes," he said. "There were a few private gatherings. Some of them were exclusive." The word exclusive hung in the air like a heavy fog. You could see people looking around, eyebrows raised. In Hollywood, exclusive doesn't always mean glamorous. Sometimes it means secretive. Sometimes it means things happen behind closed doors that never see daylight. The prosecutor carefully steered him forward. "Can you describe one of those gatherings for the court?" And that's when things got quiet. I mean, truly quiet. Not even a cough or a chair creak. Tom looked directly at the jury, not in an intimidating way, but like he wanted to make sure they understood. There was one night, about 2 years ago, private residence. No phones allowed, no cameras. It was pitched as a networking event, but it turned into something else. The prosecutor didn't interrupt. Neither did the judge. Cruise went on, and his voice dropped just slightly, almost like it hurt him to say it. "I witnessed behavior that made me uncomfortable. A few guests, some under the influence, some maybe not entirely there by choice. I don't want to speculate, but something felt wrong." People in the courtroom shifted in their seats, glancing at each other. The defense attorney stiffened, clearly preparing to object, but the judge held up a hand. "Mr. Cruise," the prosecutor continued, "can you recall anything specific said or done by Mr. Combs during this gathering?" Tom hesitated. His jaw tightened. And then he said something that made the entire room go still. He made a comment to me. Half joking, I thought at the time. Something like, "In my house everyone does what I say, even the ones who think they don't." There was no dramatic music, no gavel slam, just silence. Thick, uncomfortable silence. That sentence alone, simple as it was, carried a chill with it. It hinted at power, control, maybe worse. And the way Cruise looked after he said it? Like it had been weighing on him for a long time. Like maybe he should have said something sooner. Like this wasn't just about testifying, it was about finally speaking a truth that had been kept quiet far too long. The prosecutor nodded slowly, letting the words hang in the air before moving on. From that moment forward, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. This wasn't just a celebrity appearance anymore. Tom Cruise wasn't just another famous face sitting in a witness chair. He had become a witness to something real, something possibly damning, and everyone knew. The trial had just taken a sharp turn. There's a moment in every trial when things change, not legally, necessarily, but emotionally. A moment when everyone in the room realizes they're no longer just listening to facts. They're witnessing something heavy, something that can't be undone. That moment came right in the middle of Tom Cruise's testimony, after he repeated that quote, "In my house everyone does what I say, even the ones who think they don't." The room fell into a hush that didn't lift for what felt like minutes. The prosecutor gave him space, then gently pushed forward. "Mr. Cruise, did you witness anything at that gathering that suggested coercion or abuse?" Tom didn't answer right away. He looked down for a long second, and when he looked up again, something had shifted in his face. His voice was quieter now, more personal. "There was a young woman," he said. "Couldn't have been more than 22, maybe younger. She seemed nervous, out of place. Every time she tried to get up and leave the room, someone would gently touch her shoulder and guide her back down. Always smiling, always polite. But it happened 3 times. The jury was leaning forward now. One of the jurors had their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles were white. Cruz went on. I didn't think much of it at the time. I told myself it was just security being protective. Maybe she was part of the staff. But then I saw the look on her face, and it wasn't just fear, it was resignation. Like she knew there was no point in trying. His voice cracked, just slightly. I should have said something then. I didn't. I left early, and it's haunted me ever since. That line hit the room like a gut punch, because suddenly it wasn't about headlines anymore. It wasn't about celebrities or fame. It was about something very human. Regret, guilt, the terrible feeling of having seen something wrong and doing nothing. The defense lawyer finally stood, face tight, and objected. Your Honor, this is speculative. Mr. Cruz is interpreting behavior without evidence. But the judge, who had barely said a word for the last 10 minutes, looked directly at the defense and said calmly, overruled. The witness is describing what he observed firsthand. That alone sent murmurs through the room. You don't often hear a judge override objections during such sensitive testimony. Tom looked straight ahead, his jaw set, but his eyes were glassy. This wasn't an actor putting on a performance. This was a man reliving a moment he wished he could go back and change. The prosecutor asked one final question before stepping back. Why are you coming forward now, Mr. Cruz? And his answer was quiet, honest. Because too many people in this town have stayed quiet for too long, and because pretending not to know something is no different than helping to hide it. That was it. He stepped down from the witness stand and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. No press conference, no prepared statement. Just silence. But the weight of what he said, it lingered. You could feel it pressing down on everyone. Jurors, lawyers, reporters, even the judge. A new energy had entered the trial. The kind that doesn't fade away when the cameras stop rolling. And just like that, the trial wasn't just about what Diddy might have done. It became a question of what everyone else knew, and who finally had the courage to. The moment Tom Cruise stepped down from that witness stand, you could feel a shift in the air, not just in the courtroom, but across the country. It was like someone had thrown a rock into a perfectly still pond, and the ripples were just starting to spread. Outside the courthouse, the scene exploded. Reporters who had been growing numb after 2 weeks of legal back and forth were suddenly wide-eyed, scrambling to get live feeds up. Microphones were everywhere. News alerts hit phones within minutes. Tom Cruise testifies in Diddy trial. Hollywood star says he witnessed disturbing behavior at private party. Cruise breaks silence, regret, guilt, and a call for accountability. It was all anyone could talk about. And this time, it wasn't just the gossip channels. National networks picked it up. Legal analysts were pulled into studios within hours, dissecting every word. Was Cruise opening the door to a pattern of behavior? Would his testimony inspire others to come forward? Was this going to turn into something bigger? It wasn't just noise, it was movement. On social media, people were torn. Some were skeptical. Why now? They asked. Is he doing this for publicity? But others saw something else. Something real. He didn't have to say anything, one post read, but he did, and you could see in his face. He meant every word, and within 24 hours, that ripple started to pick up speed. 2 more celebrities, less famous but known, issued quiet statements through their reps. One said they'd be cooperating with the court if requested. Another said they had information that could support recent testimony. That might not seem like much, but in an industry where silence is the unspoken rule, that was thunder. And then came the whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, that former employees of Diddy's private staff were being contacted by attorneys. Some were asking for immunity. Some were simply afraid. Inside the courtroom, you could see the pressure starting to mount. The defense team looked rattled for the first time since the trial began. Their strategy, tight, dismissive, confident, was suddenly full of cracks. Because how do you cross-examine someone like Tom Cruise? How do you spin his regret, his hesitation, his humanity into something self-serving? You don't. And that's what made it so powerful. It wasn't just the content of his testimony. It was how he delivered it. Quietly, with a heavy heart. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a confession. And people responded to that. In the days that followed, something even stranger happened. Studio executives, usually silent during these kinds of storms, began holding internal meetings. Some called for reviews of partnerships, event protocols, vetting procedures. It was subtle. No headlines, no public moves. But people who had kept their heads down were suddenly standing a little straighter, asking questions they'd ignored for years. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a crack in the foundation. And all of it, all the movement, all the discomfort, all the late-night phone calls and frantic meetings, it all started with one man deciding to sit down and tell the truth. Tom Cruise didn't end the trial that day. He didn't deliver a final blow or slam a door shut. But he did something just as important. He opened it. By the start of week 3, something had changed, not just in the courtroom but in the air of the whole trial. Before Tom Cruise testified, the case had felt like another high-profile spectacle. You know the kind. Wealthy man, powerful connections, expensive lawyers, carefully managed public image. There was drama, sure, but it still felt distant, detached, like something the rich and famous would handle behind closed doors, while the rest of us just watched from the outside. But after Cruise spoke, the mood turned. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It felt like truth had finally found its way into the room. Suddenly, the jury looked more alert. They weren't just observing anymore. They were listening, actively, as if they'd been reminded this wasn't a movie. These weren't characters, the stakes were real. The people involved had names, histories, and consequences waiting on the other side of the verdict. The prosecution leaned into that momentum. Their tone changed. They stopped trying to win and started painting a broader picture. They brought in new witnesses, asked deeper questions. They stopped playing it safe. The defense, on the other hand, grew defensive. You could feel it. Their once confident tone was now sharper, more desperate. They objected more frequently. They interrupted more. But it wasn't working. Because once a seed of truth is planted in people's minds, no amount of legal maneuvering can quite erase it. Even the judge seemed to sense it. Rulings were firmer, more direct. Time wasn't wasted. The case, once dragging through endless technicalities, suddenly had direction. A pulse. But the biggest shift wasn't procedural, it was emotional. People started coming to court early just to get a seat. Not paparazzi, not celebrity chasers, regular people, teachers, nurses, veterans, even students. Some traveled from other cities, not because they were fans of Tom Cruise or Diddy, but because they wanted to see accountability. They wanted to see whether, in a world full of silence and power games, the truth could still matter. And outside, in the media, that sentiment spread. The headlines weren't just about celebrity anymore. They were about courage, about culture, about how easy it is to look away, and how rare it is when someone doesn't. There wasn't a sudden confession, no dramatic breakdown on the stand, but the tone of the trial had shifted in a way that no one could ignore. A culture of silence, the one that had protected powerful men for decades, had taken a hit, a clean public hit. And no matter how the verdict turned out, that shift, that was permanent. It wasn't just a trial anymore, it